ESPN Cricinfo is joined by Zimbabwe's former sports minister David Coltart to discuss the crisis in the country's cricket. Zimbabwe will play Pakistan for 2 T20s, 3 ODIs and 2 tests, and things haven't looked good. Mr. Coltart, what's your overall impression of the health of Zimbabwean cricket at the moment?
Well, at player level, it is pretty strong. One of the great achievements of the last 15 years has to transform it from a sport that was mainly played by a small number of whites to a sport which is played by the vast majority of the population. So to that extent, it's reasonably strong. However, the development of the game in the rural areas and also at the level of schools, that is under real threat. So the future to that extent is very much under threat.
Mr. Coltart, the big talking point over the last week or so has been the financial situation of Zimbabwean cricket. The players formed a union to lobby for match fees and for a percentage of World Cup disbursements. And Kyle Jarvis retired partly because of what he said was an uncertain financial situation. What is actually going on in terms of Zimbabwe cricket's money, and how do you think they can make more money and get out of debt and possibly become a profitable administration?
Well, that was one of my concerns as sports minister. Zimbabwe cricket, when Osius Vute took over, there was a lot of support at developmental level. And unfortunately, over the last decade, that has changed dramatically. The association is now very much in the red. We estimate anything between $15 to $18 million in the red. That situation is compounded by the fact that there have been very few international tours, and certainly profitable tours from, for example, England, Australia, and India, which undermines the ability of Zimbabwe cricket to address that massive debt. And that in turn has meant that players have not been paid on time. Last year, I received a delegation of players, including some of the coaches, who, having not obtained any joy from Zimbabwe cricket, came to me direct. I then involved the Sports and Recreation Commission because they had not been paid match fees. Some were owed a vast amount of money and had not been paid for up to 2 years. So I then summoned Zimbabwe Cricket and the Sports and Recreation Commission and arranged for players to be paid. But of course it undermined many players' confidence in the administration, and that resulted in people, critically important players like Kapenda Taibu leaving the game. And now we see Jarvis leaving the game, and there are others who we had hoped would be attracted to play for the country, like Gary Barnes, started to look elsewhere. And that further erodes the quality of the team and leads to this very vicious and negative cycle where we then are not competitive against international teams. So those teams are reluctant to come. They don't get the revenues that they would otherwise get from a close contest. And this is the critical state that we now find the game in Zimbabwe.
There are probably two issues that you brought up there. The one is the idea of tours, and we know that you were very involved with lobbying for teams to come to Zimbabwe, specifically with going to New Zealand and that type of thing. Now that you're no longer involved, do you see somebody else taking up that role? But also, why would teams want to play Zimbabwe? What makes them attractive to play? And then the second part of the issue is in terms of assistance. I mean, does the Zimbabwean government perhaps need to do more, or the Sports Commission need to do more in terms of helping Zimbabwean cricket develop and thrive?
Well, dealing with those two issues, firstly, yes, it's correct. I went to Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, the United Kingdom, and India, and lobbied as best as I could to restore those contacts. I was partially successful. I hope that whoever President Mugabe appoints as Minister of Sport will continue that. But of course, that is very much tied into the overall politics of the country and the way in which the country is viewed by these nations. It's dependent on that wider framework, and it's going to be very difficult to do that. And I hope that those countries will come. Turning to the second part of your question, the attractiveness of the teams. This is the critical stage that we find ourselves in, that we have not been competitive against India. The morale is very low within the team. You can see it reflected in the way the players are performing. They're playing way below the talent that we know they have. And obviously government, to get to another of your second question, government has a role to play, but unfortunately government itself is strapped for cash. We have not been able to support other sports. I had a meeting with David Richardson in Dubai in March, and he told me that Zimbabwe cricket over the next couple of years can expect to receive revenues of $25 million. Zimbabwe cricket does not have the infrastructure that, for example, you see in even New Zealand. And $25 million properly administered should be enough to grow the game and retain players. But historically, certainly in the last 10 years, it's been one of my criticisms of Zimbabwe cricket is that they have not applied money to the right places. They have not protected their players. They've not paid players on time and paid players properly in accordance with their ability. They've had a huge bloated administration. Many of the administrators receive far more than the players themselves. And until they get to grips with that and realize that the golden goose that needs to be protected is that group of players. Everything stems from those players, but they don't seem to understand that fundamental point yet.
Do you think the formation of the Players' Union will have some impact on that? I mean, obviously this union at the moment doesn't have funding and it will need to be properly run. I spoke to Tony Irish from the South African Cricketers Association yesterday, who explained to me how important it is to have an independent person who's not a cricketer but who's close to the cricketers running this union, which Zimbabwean players don't seem to have at the moment. But if they can get this Players' Association off the ground properly, do you think it could have some clout and some impact in the running of cricket in the country?
I think it is. I said to them that they needed to agree to a Players' Association. They had always blocked that before, and Zimbabwe, as you know, is one of the, I think it may be the only test nation without a Players' Association. It has been a demand of players for over a decade. And what has happened in the absence of that Players' Association is that the administration has been able to literally threaten players, especially young black players who had nothing else to turn to, and undermine their ability to negotiate reasonable terms and conditions. So I'm very pleased that this has now been agreed to. It's critical that the players get the right person to do that, to perform that role. And I'm very encouraged to see the unity amongst the players in the last couple of weeks, where all the players have got together. They have not allowed themselves to be divided, and now making these demands. And I think that if they are successful in that, and if there is a reallocation of funds and Zimbabwe cricket starts treating their players better, then we will retain the players. They will play better. We will then be able to attract these teams, and that in turn ultimately is going to address the financial problems that are faced at present.
It's a positive note that we'll end off on then, Mr. Coulter. Obviously a lot of disappointment and worry in Zimbabwean cricket at the moment, but at the same time, perhaps this could be the start of something better. Where do you see things going in the next couple of months? Pakistan are coming, Sri Lanka are coming. Is there an opportunity for Zimbabwean cricket to get back on its feet?
Well, I have great faith in that bunch of players. Right at the beginning of this conversation, I spoke about the great achievement in the last 15 years, and that is to spread the game right across our nation. And that gives me a lot of hope for the future. But having said that, I think that we need to have realistic expectations. Morale is very low in the team. Now, I had a dinner with the Indian team and some of the Zimbabwean team when India played Zimbabwe, and I could see that the morale of the team is very low, and it's been damaged even further through the loss of Kyle Jarvis. He was a key member of the team. So we need to have realistic expectations for this Pakistan tour. I know that they'll give it 100%, but they're not going to be to full strength. And as I say, mentally, I don't think that they are good. If the administration starts to treat players better, they are going to have a better mindset. And then, because of their inherent talent, we know that they can start to perform better in the months and years that lie ahead.
Let's hope for that, Mr. Colbert. We'll see you in a few weeks in Zimbabwe for that series against Pakistan, and hopefully we can catch up then. Thanks for joining us.